Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Women for the Environment Breakfast, proudly presented by Bush Heritage Australia. My name is Emily Rice, and I'm delighted to be your MC this morning in this stunning venue. And happy Friday, everybody. I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri traditional owners upon whose land this event is taking place. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present and welcome all Aboriginal people here with us today. Further, I'd like to recognise that the environment and landscapes that we're all working towards protecting are on lands that have never been ceded in this country. It is wonderful to see so much colour out there and to see so many people from corporate, government, academia and environmental sectors here today. Thank you for giving up your precious time on a Friday morning. May I please introduce Wurundjeri Elder Tony Garvey to perform our Welcome to Country.
Thank you very much, Emily, for that warm welcome, and thank you all for inviting me here today. It's very important we walk this hard road together. We're absolutely shattered over the election a couple of weeks ago, so I'd like to thank all the yes voters that got on board and supported us. I'd like to start off with saying Waminjika to everyone. Waminjika in the Wurundjeri Wurrung language means welcome. So welcome to Indigenous and non-Indigenous people here today. I'd also just like to say I'm very proud and honoured to be standing tall for my people once again, like I have done for 35 years and will continue to do so for the rights of their own country. My great-grandfather was the last Narangita. Narangita in the Wurundjeri Wurrung language means last head tribesman leading our mob out at Corandurk on the mission where I live today with my family. He took over from my great-uncle. My great-uncle is King Barak. King Barak was our fearless leader that took on the government in the 1800s, right up till 1903 when he passed. My great-grandfather took over from 1903 and led our mob till 1926 when the mission was closed due to colonisation and being forced out into white society. The Wurundjeri people, they are also a part of the Kulin Nation, so Kulin means man. In the Kulin Nation, we had the 5 language groups. We had the Wadawurrung to the west, the Coorong, who were the westerly neighbours to the Wadawurrung, Tanarong to the northeast, Bunurong to the southwest, and the Wurrung of the Wurundjeri territory that we stand on here today. The Wurundjeri lies within the cities of Melbourne, extend from the mountains of the Great Dividing Range, south of the Yarra River to the Mordialloc Creek, west to the Werribee River, and east to Mount Baw Baw. The Wurundjeri people, they have a social totem. It is Bunjil the Eagle. Bunjil represents spiritual powers throughout many parts of Australia. Bunjil taught all the laws about life, behaviour and ceremonies to make sure that our culture would continue for all walks of life throughout Australia. So Bunjil was referred to as the creator of mankind. Bunjil created great people from the land. That is why we call the land our mother, or the mother of creation. Never can the land be taken away. The land will always belong to Aboriginal people, as we are part of the land and the land is part of us. Our story is similar to yours. Yours is by your chosen faith, ours is by the dream time. We both have creators and beliefs, and ours is Bunjil. It is a traditional custom of the Australian Aboriginal communities to be asked and to give permission for people to enter their lands. And today you have now joined with me to honour the spirits of my ancestors, past, present and merging, who have nurtured these lands for over 60,000 years. And we, as the owners of the lands, offer our heartily welcome to the lands and hope that together as citizens of this beautiful country, we can build, develop and unite stronger nations for all peoples. I'll close in the Wurrung language, which is Waminjika, Wandoon, Wurundjeri, Balak, Yemen, Kumbibik, which means you're most welcome to the lands of the Wurundjeri people. As I said before, before I jump down and get that loud applause I am expecting, I would just like to just touch in, and I really meant what I said before, thanking all the yes voters that got on board with us, you know. I think it just goes to show us how far behind this country is with education. And it's a real shame that the government have put us this far back. It was deliberately done many, many years ago to not recognise our people. They can respect every other culture in this country except for the actual people that own this country. And it's an absolute shame. I was a big promoter for the yes vote, so you can imagine how I'm feeling today. I was on stage yesterday and I actually broke down and cried. So I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to stay strong. But I'm going to fight for my people, and I will keep fighting for my people. This country needs a shake up, and they need to realise actually who owns this country. I'd like to thank you all for inviting me here today. Please get on board with us, support us and help us out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for telling us about your family and for your stirring words and your conviction. We really appreciate it. This morning we're recognising the importance of strong leadership in protecting and enhancing our diverse and beautiful natural world, and shine a spotlight on the value of female voices, but thanks blokes for being here too, and influence in this space. While climate change and net zero have been the headline act for some time, biodiversity and ecosystem health is rapidly taking centre stage. There's an increasing shift in mindset and a growing recognition that nature can no longer just be considered a corporate social responsibility issue. Nature risk is financial risk and must be seen as a strategic risk management priority. More than half of the world's economic output is moderately or highly dependent on nature. There's a growing recognition in the finance and business sector of the need to move beyond climate considerations and address nature-related concerns in unison. With nature-related financial disclosures now taking focus, it's imperative for both the private sector, industry and government to act early, understand the complexities involved, which we'll hear more about shortly, and take advantage of the synergies between the solutions to nature loss and the climate crisis. As the challenges of net zero and nature-positive societal outcomes continue to advance, many investors and companies recognise the need to transition their business models and their value chains. A nature-positive approach is also a source of potential future competitive and commercial advantage. Your boards will be interested in hearing that. Companies not thinking about nature will not have a full view of their risk profile and are in danger of being left behind on their reporting obligations. Most are at the start of their journeys to embed nature-related considerations into their strategies. Defining how companies can assess, prioritise, measure, address and track their impacts and dependencies on natural ecosystems is a significant step in the right direction for creating a nature-positive future. We're going to discuss that idea and more during our panel this morning. We have 3 panellists who will demonstrate just how critical female leadership is to addressing environmental challenges like biodiversity loss. I would now like to introduce Executive Manager of Engagement, Vibeke Stuyson, to present the very important Bush Heritage Address and tell us a little bit more about this wonderful organisation. Thank you so much.
How are you? How are you feeling? Thank you so much and good morning everyone. I too wish to welcome you to this morning's breakfast. I'm so excited about the panel discussion coming up. And I want to acknowledge, thank you Tony for your beautiful welcome to country and acknowledge that we are on unceded country. I pay my deepest respect to the elders past, present and emerging. And I want to acknowledge the gratitude of being able to share this country, but also the sorrow for the cost of that sharing. I'm really proud to work for an organisation that is focused on walking hand in hand to heal country together. When I was asked to speak today, I'm stepping in for Bambi, who is our Aboriginal Partnerships Manager, who couldn't be here today. I, of course, said yes straight away. Megan, our incredible event manager, said, "Can you just do a quick introduction to Bush Heritage?" And I was like, "Yep, no problem. I have a PowerPoint. It'll be easy." And then I was sitting on a late flight out of Adelaide last night, and we got the dreaded call that engineers were needed. We weren't quite sure how long it was going to take. And so my laptop was dead. I didn't have a book. I'd stalked all our panellists on LinkedIn. I'd read through the guest list today, and I was sort of to the point of, okay, it's either Sudoku or culling photos on my phone. So I went for the phone. And after that initial moment of just having a moment of going, oh my God, how is it possible to be so unphotogenic? I quickly scrolled past that and had a look at the kind of places I've been in the last month and the people I've met. And as I went through all those photos and looked at all those places, I thought actually the one standout of all those meetings and all those places was a sense of hope. And so I'd like to talk about hope in the few minutes that I've been allocated. But of course, I promised Megan I would also talk about Bush Heritage and the work that we do. So before we go off track a bit further, I'll share with you a brand video that we've just done on Bush Heritage, so you get a sense of who we are, and then if you have more questions about our actual work, I'll happily talk to anyone during or after the breakfast. But let's just tick off my actual task.
Over millions of years, our ecosystems have evolved to support billions of diverse species. They bring an irreplaceable beauty to our world, sustain us and enliven our curiosity. Here in Australia, our unique ecosystems allow animals and plants found nowhere else in the world to thrive, one of which sparked the beginning of Bush Heritage Australia. In 1991, our founders raised the funds to purchase 2 forest blocks and prevent them from being sold and logged. A dedicated community was born, and our mission to heal and protect the bush. Over the years, Bush Heritage has grown into a leading conservation not-for-profit. Now our impact spans the continent and its waters through our vast reserve network and partnerships. We apply science and the knowledge of Australia's First Nations people to guide our actions and build resilience into our landscapes and restore habitat for precious wildlife. We see possibility far and wide and walk in harmony with First Nations people and our agricultural partners to make sure our on-ground impact is deep, collaborative and long-lived. Working from one horizon to the next, for the smallest ant and the tallest tree, for you and those who follow in your footsteps. By 2030, we are working towards an ambitious plan to deepen and double our impact. This work is made possible by our supporters. With your help, we can achieve these ambitious targets. Our life and our future depend on these complex ecosystems, and they depend on us.
So that was the overview of Bush Heritage. Now back to the photos. So I started the month off by going to the US to meet our donors there, big and small, as well as a lot of our partners. Travelled around the country, and the key takeaway from me on that trip was this really genuine interest in what's happening in Australia and how people can help, but also a global focus on conservation. So there was a genuine sense of we need to do things now and we need to do it together. And we came home from that trip with endless invitations to collaborate, to partner, to do things together and exchange knowledge. And there was this real sense of togetherness and kinship. I then came home and hugged my family and then jumped on a plane to WA for our annual strategic planning day with our board and our reserve visit. That's how we reward our board members. They don't get paid, but they do get to go on country once a year. So we had a strategic planning day where we talked about where we've come from, and you saw some of that in that video, where we want to go and how we're going to get there. And it was a really humbling discussion actually to think about 30 years ago we bought a tiny block in Tasmania. Now we're across 42 reserves, soon to be 43. We have an impact across millions of land, and while our target by 2030 is to deepen and double, and it sounds pretty scary, when you look at our history, we're all filled with confidence because our history shows that we will get there. So it was a really powerful day, and we then ended up going out on reserve. We drove a couple of hours out of Albany to our reserves in the Fitzsterling Range, which for those of you that haven't been there, it's considered a global biodiversity hotspot. We have a few reserves out there. Our work is very much focused on revegetation, and that first photo I showed, I might see if I can go back actually. This photo here is taken at one of those reserves. I don't really know how to describe the sense of standing on top of a hill and seeing this, other than you can probably see I'm still smiling. You can probably guess which side of the road is a Bush Heritage Reserve and which one isn't. It was a really incredible thing to stand there and see the impact of our work. And when I say our work, it is not just Bush Heritage, it is endless volunteers. It is our partners, Screening Australia, who's here today, is one of them. So many people, so many researchers have been out there visiting our research facility, and it hasn't been easy. We've had lots of failures. I was speaking to staff about failures for quite a while, and they were showing all these things that they tried out and it didn't work, but then we had successes as well. And it was just another one of those moments of going, oh my God, there are so many people that are working towards the same thing and achieving incredible things together. So that was last week. Then this week, let's quickly skip through this. This week was all about our next big thing that is happening for Bush Heritage, and I will show you a quick video at the end of it. We're really excited that we're about to make the biggest property acquisition in our 32-year history. So we're buying 235,000 hectares of beautiful land in the Painted Desert, and we're thrilled. It's just outside the dog fence. There's incredible threatened species there. It's really, really important for us. And so to get there, we of course need to raise funds. So this week was all about meeting with our supporters and those that have networks to tell them about this incredible opportunity and please help us. So we started off Monday morning with welcoming a couple who have supported us for quite a few years, with smaller amounts, and we were included in their will. And when they heard about this, they decided that actually now is the time to give. They wanted to see action now. They realised that we can't wait for this will one day, hopefully a long time from now, to happen. So they gave a gift that they actually got to see the joy of giving. So that was really special. On Tuesday, we spoke to some other donors who also wanted to support, but their key thing was, we don't want to just give, we want to inspire others to give. So they made a gift that was a matched giving gift. So between now and December 25, for every dollar that we get given, they're going to match it up to $1 million. How incredibly special is that? And then this is from Adelaide, where we met with a whole bunch of supporters and partners, again, to talk about this incredible property called Evelyn Downs. And in the room, we had people who were financial supporters, we had people who had volunteered, we had people who had helped open doors for us, and they were all just so excited to be part of this next part of our story. And we were welcomed by the traditional owners as well, who were excited about Bush Heritage coming to that area and working together, thinking about all the things that we can achieve together. And so now I'm here in a room full of people that are passionate and smart and want to do something. And so that's why I changed the presentation from the normal standard PowerPoint presentation, because I think my takeaway from the last month is that there are people everywhere who care, who understand that now is time to do something, and that we can all be part of that journey. We can all have an impact. We can all contribute. So our work is possible because of people who take action. People like you who are passionate, who support us, or others like us, because we're just one of many operators, of course. You help us plant trees, build infrastructure, you support us financially, you give us your knowledge and your time, you sponsor events like these, thank you ANZ, and you connect us with people, and this morning is a way for us to connect all of you together. So I hope you have a really wonderful morning. I'm really looking forward to the rest of this morning, and thank you for indulging my photo journey of my camera. I'll now leave you with a 30-second, actually, a quick tour of the new property, and then a video that we launched this week as well about the acquisition. But please enjoy this morning, and thank you so much for coming.
Evelyn Downs is about 230,000 hectares of beautiful country. It would be our largest property, so the fact that it is so large really helps with those 17 conservation dependent species here to be able to find a home.
To get an opportunity to purchase property of this size in this area is actually really amazing. Bush Heritage supporters are what makes this happen, and we really need their support to purchase Evelyn Downs and protect these areas for the future.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vibs. And yes, your photo roll is far more exciting than mine. It's got endless pictures of a 6-year-old boy, which is quite exciting to me, but boring to everybody else. But on a more serious note, it's just really inspiring to see the work that Bush Heritage has done and what they've achieved over 30, 40 years. So another congratulations, please, to Bush Heritage. I'm excited to introduce 3 incredible women who are using their passion and expertise to propel business and government towards nature-positive futures. Please welcome Estelle Parker, CEO at the Responsible Investment Association Australia. Hand up, please. Thank you, Estelle.
Not quite yet.
Elisa DeWitt, partner at Norton Rose Fulbright, and Alexandra Gartmann, chair of the Victorian Agriculture and Climate Change Council. Thank them all, please, for joining us today. Now, hopefully you can all, yes, you can still hear me. This is fantastic. Everything's working well. So to start with, to set the scene, so to speak, I'd like to ask each of you briefly, and we will just take it in turns perhaps from this side, why protecting nature is important to you, and a double-barrel question, how you think female leadership can help shape our response to the environmental threats we face. I can come back to it if you forget that one, but why is protecting nature important to you?
Well, look, I think like so many of the people here, it's just the alarming rate at which we are destroying nature. You know, I was recently did a trek through the Andes in Peru, and you kind of go up to 4,200 metres and then come down and you're in the rainforest, and all the little kind of microclimates that you're walking through, even in a day, and it really kind of became so visible, and being in it so apparent just how interrelated all of these climates are, and the importance of kind of protecting, retaining, and then restoring that biodiversity. It's just so crucial. On a professional level, I suppose, RIA, Responsible Investment Association Australasia, we started a nature working group of investors over 2 years ago now, and it was really in response to the fact that investors are really understanding just how crucial nature is to the operations and bottom line of their businesses, and also how, I suppose, how important, how dependent these businesses are and our economy is on the services that nature provides. And then interlinked with that, how crucial nature is to the climate goals that we all have, which is really an existential threat. So yeah, so at a personal level, it's experiencing nature is really important to me, but also the work that I do through Responsible Investment Association, it's really important increasingly to our members.
And how do you think female leadership can help shape our response?
Yeah, look,
what qualities do we have as women that's going to help this
Yeah, look, the research has shown, and none of you will be surprised, that our leadership style is much more collaborative than men. Like, this has kind of been proven over the decades when we're looking at the different leadership styles between women and men. And we need collaboration to do this. You know, we need all sectors of the economy. We need government, we need ranger groups, we need environmental NGOs, we need the community to protect and restore nature. So I think that kind of bringing that collaboration into this space is going to be absolutely crucial, because we don't have much time left. It is a really urgent thing that we all need to do, and we need to do it together. So that's what I think kind of the female leadership style can bring to solving this issue.
Right. And Alex, what about you? Why is protecting nature?
Well, I actually have grown up in most of my life in rural communities, and I go to nature that's really accessible for most rural and remote communities. I go there to recharge, and I see that rural communities that I've lived in and worked with use nature to recharge, and nature is fundamental to the social fabric of those communities, for their industries, economies, who they are. So that's sort of just, there's a selfish reason, because that's my recharge point. And I also see the fundamental sort of entwining of rural communities and the environment where they're based. And then from a female leadership perspective, diversity makes decision-making stronger, makes organisations stronger. And so having women around the table and having a range of stakeholder groups represented actually means that we have deeper discussions, more robust debates, different styles, and I actually think we come out much better outcomes at the end. So for me, we've just got to be part of the conversation. We're not exclusively owning the conversation, but we're part.
So I guess I've been working environment protection, but more recently in my career with the climate space. And it really is that overlap now between how we have to address climate change, and particularly climate mitigation and adaptation, with the protection of nature. The two, it goes so strongly hand in hand. And the idea that we can address climate change through also protecting and restoring the natural environment that we have, I think, is a really strong motivator for what I do. I'm very fortunate that in my legal career, I get to work with a lot of organisations and individuals who, at their very heart, are trying to protect the natural environment that we have. So a lot of work, even though I'm a lawyer sitting at a desk in an office, actually, one of the joys of what I do is being able to get out onto site, onto the land, to see my clients' projects. I just thought I'd recap that one of the things for me about nature is that very strong kind of almost physical connection of being in the environment. So I developed that from a really early age when I went on a trip with my parents to the Daintree rainforest. And I vividly remember kind of that strong connection that I felt to this amazing environment that I was in. And I think that has really stayed with me. And fortunately, I've been able to combine that kind of, I guess, love of the environment with my legal career. In terms of the women perspective, I was actually reflecting on this, and I think the perspective that I come at this from is from a parent, as a parent. So I want my children to experience the same opportunities and have those same experiences that I've had, whether it's seeing a koala, suddenly appear and come into the environment where you are, being able to have those amazing experiences of getting out to the Great Barrier Reef or whatever it may be. So I think of, I guess, the contribution that I make in space is really as a parent. And perhaps just one other reflection, which I'm not sure how this will go down, but I was reflecting overnight that, and again, it's more with the climate, I guess, space, but also probably has that overlap with nature, which is I do wonder whether if we'd had more women in roles in some of the companies that have caused some of the issues that we're experiencing, whether we'd still be in the same situation that we are. But that might be a bit controversial this early in the morning.
We're all friends here, that's fine. Well, Alex, we'll put this question to all of you, but I'll start with you in the middle. Generally speaking, to what extent do you see organisations bringing nature into their agenda and factoring the environment into strategy and risk planning, either from a general perspective or from, what's happening at your organisation?
Yeah, yep. It's actually really varied. So I sit across a number of organisations now, predominantly in the agricultural value chain, and there is a very wide range of awareness, engagement and action. And I think that's part of the challenge, is if we're talking about farmers or if we're talking about listed companies or anywhere in between, the understanding and the sophistication of knowledge has such a wide spectrum that we're trying to target and communicate across a really broad range. And so some of the actions and discussions that I'm seeing in listed companies that I'm connected to or have been connected to, just getting sustainability reporting and just getting on top of TCFD, climate-related reporting and disclosures, is such a challenge in its own right. And now we've got nature coming, and those companies are saying, yep, great, what, when and what? We still haven't quite nailed TCFD, so how do we take this on as well?
Do you get some eye rolls?
Look, it's actually it's interesting that where I've seen really strong engagement is generally at the board level. And I'm seeing senior management across companies where it's challenged. And that's where I think boards need to be thinking about the KPI and metrics that they're using to manage and reward and influence where management effort goes. And we know, everyone in the room knows that tone from the top is critically important in any organisation. And so that has to flow through. So yes, there are eye rolls, and yes, there are people that go, yeah, but it doesn't really impact on my KPI. And these other metrics are really important and they determine my reward. We have I don't think remuneration committees have yet really worked out how to measure. Really, how do we measure nature?
We're going to get to that. You guys have got the answers, haven't you? So, Elisa, how do you see organisations, or are you seeing it from your perspective, bringing nature into their agenda?
Yeah. So I guess
already.
I'm in a unique position because a lot of the clients that I work with and the companies that I support are integrally involved in protecting nature, particularly in the carbon space. So we work with a lot of companies that are out there doing carbon projects, Greening Australia being one of those, but where they're out planting trees, restoring their natural environment, looking for ways to achieve better, regenerative agricultural practices, whatever it might be. So at the same time, though, I also work with developer clients who very often are having an impact on nature. So for them and working with them, it's very much a case of, well, how do we minimise that impact, and how do we then look at ways of essentially offsetting that impact? I do think generally the corporate world is not, really will know what's hit it in terms of the fact that nature is coming down the road very quickly. So as you say, they've got most of them have got on top of climate and how they need to deal with climate risk and assessment, and then reporting their climate issues. But I think nature is going to be a whole nother issue for them. So we recently ran a boardroom briefing session for a number of our clients, and we had, the board directors and the C-suite in the room, and we had Jeff Summerhays come and present at that. And I think we'd all thought, well, we're going to be talking about climate, but he spent the whole couple of hours talking about nature. And I think you could see the faces in the room going, nature, why would we as company directors need to start thinking about nature? We understand climate, but you're now asking us to think about nature. And I think it was that real light bulb moment, this is something else we're going to have to get our heads around. So yes, I think there's definitely different kind of phases of appreciation on how nature needs to be dealt with in a corporate setting.
Yeah, Estelle, what are you seeing?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that kind of at the boardroom level is coming from investors. Investors have kind of picked up on this. We're hearing, for example, a couple of days ago, the head of the European Central Bank set out very, very clearly that, in fact, destruction of nature is a massive threat to the global economy. Investors know it's a threat to their portfolios, and they're now talking to their investee companies and sort of saying, well, what are you doing about this? And seeking ways to kind of look at how what impact these companies are having on nature and what risks the destruction of nature is posing to those investments. And I think sort of what we're seeing is an increasing attention by investors to this issue, both in terms of how they're engaging with companies. So we run quite a lot of really in-depth research into how investors are looking at and dealing with environmental, social and governance issues. And we're seeing nature kind of creep up in terms of a issue that investors are focused on. So I think now when investors are talking to their investee companies, it is the fifth most significant issue that they are engaging with companies on. It comes well behind climate change and climate-related disclosures are by far and away the biggest issue that investors are thinking about. We have, of course, human rights, modern slavery, but coming at fifth at, I think, 54% in our last survey of investors are speaking with investee companies about nature. And then we're also seeing increased dollars flowing into sustainability-themed investments that are focusing on nature and biodiversity. So $20.5 billion last year was invested in issues related to biodiversity, conservation and natural capital, but then you add to that 14 billion on sustainable forestry and land management, and then sustainable water, healthy rivers and oceans, 8 billion. So it's not enough by any means, but we're getting there. And then on the other side of things, looking at the impact investment, which is the really intentional investment into sustainability issues, seeking real and measurable outcomes. By far and away, conservation, environment and agriculture is the biggest focus for impact investors. So, and our members are seeing, certainly consumers, we have all the big kind of banks, super funds, investment managers as members of ours, and they are seeing from their members, from super fund members, a real desire for their super funds, their banking products to be invested in line with their ethics as well. So it's coming at them from the consumer level also.
So it sounds like it's definitely on the agenda, or it's not just something that's far away for the organisations.
No, that's right. Yeah. And as we've already heard, it's coming pretty fast.
Yeah. Elisa, we have this, obviously net zero, we understand what that means, and obviously that's your day-to-day job, but we have a rival to that, which is nature positive. What does the term actually mean for organisations? And, one day, do you think nature positive will be quite as recognisable?
Well, I didn't coin this. I actually think Jeff Summer has also coined this as well, or someone else did, but we're now saying that nature positive is the new net zero. So really, as I said, kind of people have understood what's needed in terms of addressing climate, and now it's very much moving on to the natural environment and also biodiversity conservation. I think the challenge with nature is that it's way more complicated than climate. So climate is easy. You've got one metric, 1 tonne of CO2 equivalent. It's air, it's one environmental medium. Nature is it's everything. It's our, it's our land, it's our waters, it's the air as well, and it's our species. So a lot more complexity in terms of being able to think about this concept of nature positive, but essentially, at its heart, perhaps best encapsulated by the outcome of the of COP15. So you might have heard of COPs. We have climate COPs. We also have nature COPs. So, which is where the whole world comes together and tries to reach agreement on a way forward to address global issues. So we had the outcome of the Convention of Biological Diversity, the COP15 that took place at the end of last year in Montreal, and out of that came this global biodiversity framework. And so if you think about that, you can think about it as the equivalent of the Paris Agreement. Wow. So we have got our Paris Agreement targets in terms of our temperature goals we're seeking to achieve, and now we've got our biodiversity, global biodiversity framework in terms of the natural environment goals that we're seeking to achieve. And has 4 global 2050 goals and then 23 global 2030 targets, but at its heart, the goal is to stop and to reverse biodiversity loss. And so 2 of the 2030 targets are really how we achieve restoration of existing degraded environments. So the aim being to achieve restoration of 30% of, as I say, all environments, so land, water, including coastal and marine environments by 2030, but then also how we protect a further 30% by 2030. So that, I guess, sets the vision in terms of what needs to be achieved, again, you know, at a global level, not just at an Australian level. I think at an Australian level, as you would know from those of you sitting in this room, we have a lot of work to do in terms of the impact that we've had on our natural environment. I think the aspect that concerns me most is still our continuing deforestation and our removal of native vegetation. And I think that will and needs to be a particular, a really important focus of both the political system, but also all of communities and other stakeholders, including the investment community, needs to be a really strong focus for Australia as we move forward.
And just a sort of question without notice on that, with your COP in Montreal, was everyone, you know, because it is so divisive, the climate COPs are always so divisive, you know, from an international perspective. Was there harmony or was there division between the end target, the end vision, or was everyone on the same page?
More or less. I mean, these COPs, for anyone who's been to them, we were talking about, I was talking to someone earlier about, you know, how frustrating they are when you think about it. You're getting, you know, 190 odd countries, or, you know, people in a room trying to reach agreement on or a consensus on something, and they are really, really tedious to get to that. And it is about, at the end of the day, what words go on the page, what actually gets documented, because that's then sets the agenda of the way forward. But I think generally, and there was a bit of a lead up as well to that COP because of delays around COVID, but I think generally there is now this really strong momentum and understanding of the significance of what we've done to our natural environment, and I think that is a really strong driver of this consensus.
Great to hear. Estelle, back in September, and some people in this room may have already be fully aware of this, but the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, known as TNFD, wrapped up their work on delivering the risk management and disclosure framework. So for those who aren't across it, how could the framework better enable organisations to integrate nature into decision making, and how does it fit into sustainability more broadly? I know the government has put something up on their website which was very, very detailed, but if you can take us through what it actually means.
Sure. Look, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures was a global group that kind of got together a couple of years ago and sought to come up with a way to give investors and businesses the information that they need, consistent information that they need to measure impact on nature, as well as the dependencies that operations have on natural capital and nature-related services, and also the opportunities that might come from that. And so this, and it kind of, I guess, key for our members as well is the risks that the destruction of nature poses for them. So it's kind of a recognition that we all depend on nature as an asset and the services that it provides, and that the erosion of nature is compromising this. And so this framework was developed, it was a science-based approach. It was developed through an open innovation approach, so a lot of feedback from the private sector, from First Nations groups, Indigenous people and local communities, and from governments as well. The Australian government was actually a funding partner for the TNFD, which I think is really encouraging, and the signalling that's coming from the Australian government at the moment in terms of how seriously it's taking nature-related financial disclosures is really fantastic. So the framework itself has 14 disclosures, which is quite a lot. The TCFD, which is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, has 11, and they're designed to kind of work together. But nature is quite different. You know, when you're measuring carbon, that is one thing. You have a unit, it's hard, but it's kind of doable. Nature, on the other hand, it's so localised, and it's sort of dependent on biomes. It's dependent on kind of knowing where your assets are and being able to understand that. So it's hard. It's hard, but these 14 disclosures are under 4 pillars. One is a governance pillar, so disclosing the information on an organisation's governance of nature-related dependencies, impacts, risks and opportunities. There's a strategy pillar which goes to looking at the effects of these dependencies, impacts, risks and opportunities on the organisation in a material sense. There's risks and impact management, so disclosing the processes that the company is using to identify, assess and prioritise these nature-related dependencies, impacts, risks and opportunities, and then the metrics as well that they're using to assess these. So you would hope that from all of this, an organisation can really identify its reliance on nature as well as its impact on nature, and then investors can in turn have kind of comparable information so they know how an organisation is managing nature. And I think sort of from all of this, if we can get that consistent information, then we can make much better decisions as investors in terms of the assets that we're choosing to invest in and how we might want to engage with companies to encourage them to do this.
What's been the response to that document being put out? I mean, obviously it was highly anticipated. Has it been overwhelmingly positive, or again, like COP, is there divergent views? I mean, obviously it depends who you talk to, but what has been the overwhelming feeling?
Look, from our members, it's extremely positive. Like, investors really want this information. As I said, they're increasingly focusing on nature. There are challenges. There are challenges in relation to that we're hearing in relation to access to data, and it's really great to see that the Australian government and the TNFD globally are seeking to kind of help with that. And we're also, I suppose there is a challenge resource-wise. You know, Alex was talking about what we call disclosures fatigue. Like, there's a big focus at the moment on the climate disclosures and organisations kind of having to move on to nature. It does take time, it takes resources, and it takes expertise as well that might not exist within those organisations. So there are challenges, but we've, you know, the first step is there. We have the disclosures framework. It's very clear. The message at the moment is to get started, to just start reporting and choose 1 or 2 out of the 14 recommendations. And that kind of the comment that was made before about the penny dropping in boardrooms, I think, is really happening. And once these companies start reporting against this framework, then they start to get an idea of the risk that has been sitting on their balance sheets that hasn't been identified up until now.
Sometimes for companies, though, disclosure can be a scary word.
Right.
And obviously you've touched on it there. So as a disclosure regime, how can it actually lead to action? What is the link between organisations disclosing their impacts and providing that information, and then actual positive impacts for the environment? Or is it just we don't want it to be just a box ticking exercise. We told you this is the problem, and this is what we're doing.
Yeah. Look, it is.
Or are we too far away from that at the moment?
Yeah, look, I mean, it is scary, I think, for some companies. Like, by disclosing what impacts you're having on nature, you're effectively saying our operations are involved in destroying nature in whatever way. So, this is something, everyone has has carbon emissions. So that's, I suppose, less scary than when this very kind of real and visible impact that you're having on nature. But once you've got the disclosures out there, then whilst targets aren't mandated by the TNFD reporting framework, it does lead to targets, because once you're reporting, then you're kind of saying, well, how can I improve for next time? And I would kind of add, I suppose, that this is not the be-all and end-all. It's not going to solve the problem in and of itself, just having the information out there. It's part of the puzzle, but we also need, strong environmental laws, for example. We need them to be enforced, right? Yep. We need, and companies to be held to account in that regard. We need all the work that's been done by organisations like Bush Heritage Australia and others. We need the community. It's not just the private sector can't solve this, I suppose, on its own. And, this is kind of what I hear sometimes is that there's a lot of hope that nature disclosures are somehow in and of themselves going to solve the problem. That's not the case, but it is one part of the puzzle.
On disclosures still, Elisa, do you think right now, obviously we know it's voluntary and it's market-led, and we're encouraging people to get ahead of the curve, but do you think that these disclosures will become mandatory sooner rather than later? And if they do, what does the private sector need to understand about their obligations, or what should they do now to sort of get prepared?
So my headline for the corporates in the room is that we will get to mandatory nature-related disclosures, just as we've seen in the climate space. So again, just looking at where we've come from in the climate space, we will, from the 1st of July next year, have mandatory obligations on corporations to disclose their climate-related impacts and issues. We're expecting legislation to come out later this year, but at the moment the government's intention is to kick that off. And this is consistent with what we've seen globally at a global level. So there are a lot of jurisdictions now which have moved to mandatory reporting. We know that TNFD reporting is voluntary at the moment, but if we look at what's happened with climate and it follows a similar playbook, then you would expect that that's where we'll end up. We'll end up with mandatory reporting from a nature perspective as well. And there are a lot of developments that are happening at that international level that are driving this. So there's the International Sustainability Standards Board, which has put out standards for disclosing in relation to sustainability and climate, and they're now working on standards for nature. So yes, I think we will get there. It's just a question of when. In terms of, I guess, what can be done now, I completely agree with Estelle, and this is the recommendation from TNFD, is just to get started, is to take bite-sized chunks, get familiar, or choose some recommendations that you think are feasible.
When you look at those 14 areas, it's like, oh my God.
Exactly.
How are we going to do
saw
this?
It with climate reporting. It was a gradual process where people would take off a few of the recommendations and report against those until they kind of worked up to the full package, and we'll see the same thing with nature. But it is daunting, and I think the other aspect is how you resource that as well, because a lot of companies are not going to have the internal resources that they need to be able to do this. So I guess that means the consulting sector is going to be very busy going forward. But it is, I think, also focusing on perhaps the materiality as well. So try and identify, if you can, what's most material from your organisation in terms of how you interact with nature, and perhaps start with that as the kind of starting position.
So it's coming.
I might just add, we would really like to see this be made mandatory sooner rather than later. I think investors would agree, having that comparable information across the board would be really, really useful for really good investment decision making. And the Sustainable Finance Strategy consultation paper that the Treasurer released a couple of weeks ago was really encouraging to see nature at the heart of that. And I think that kind of signalling is really important at the moment. So I see that investors are kind of seeing that articulated by the government and saying, okay, we don't want to be behind, we want to be ahead of this, and a lot of them were kind of a little bit behind on the climate piece, so they don't want that to happen again, and they are starting to look at this seriously and getting started.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, is have you got the government, you know, is the federal government listening? It sounds like they are, so that's great. Alex?
I think so, yeah.
What about the agriculture? I mean, obviously there's, you know, it's pretty clear that agriculture is fairly heavily entwined with nature, so how are they placed to respond? Yeah,
Look, I might start by going to the mandatory versus voluntary. And I think if we have mandatory reporting without consequence, then let's not have it. You know, if there's no consequence for not having a decent mandatory report and seeing progress, then it's kind of like the formal tick in the box without caring what happens underneath. So we need to be ready for mandatory reporting, and I think we need to take some lessons from the mandatory reporting that's coming in from a climate perspective before we apply it to nature. And when I think about agriculture, which we can easily say the agricultural sector, but in reality it's family businesses, and 80,000 of them across Australia, globally, small landholders through to corporate landholders. And I think some of the learnings that we should take from a climate reporting perspective is that no matter what companies seek to do in terms of data, they've got to get that data from somewhere. And in the agricultural value chain, it starts at the farm level. And so farmers are being asked to collect data without adequate tools, resources, and then they're being asked to show actions on mitigation when there are very, very few commercial solutions available. So it's putting enormous pressure on a cohort of people that already deal with a number of variables that are outside of their control and having to provide data. And there's very little frameworks around who owns the data, where does it get housed, what's the security arrangements for those data. And farmers are having to provide climate data at the moment to pretty much anyone they interact with. Most of them have got more than one bank, so I know there's a number of banks in the room. You'll all have the same clients, particularly over their generational existence. But many of you are asking for data in different formats. So there's no one place to go to simplify the data. We're asking farmers to provide their emissions footprint for their farm. Do we have a methodology, an agreed methodology to do that? Do we have the capabilities to be able to support farmers to assess their emissions footprint? Now, this is something that's starting. There are a number of programs. So the Victorian government's actually got a program where they're going out and doing on-farm emission audits and assessments, and then helping develop action plans. Now, the action plans are mostly about adaptation, not mitigation, because there are very few mitigation opportunities currently available. So that methodology, but how do we make that across every farm so that in the next 12 months every farm can do an on-farm assessment, when most of the advisors to farm businesses don't have that capability themselves? Most of the companies doing climate and nature-based reporting work, those individuals are scarce as hen's teeth. They might actually all be in this room. So if you're looking for a job, the world's your oyster at the moment if you've got some of those capabilities. So I think from a learning for agriculture from climate, baseline. We need to have baselines and an on-farm assessment through the value chain assessment of climate and biodiversity now. So how do you assess that? Do we have that clear? The market, which we talk a lot about biodiversity markets and carbon markets, and large corporates and the global community are really excited about it. I say to farmers, do not sell your carbon. You need to inset, not offset, because really the financial benefit you're going to get for your farm is by demonstrating your smallest footprint to be the priority supplier to the supermarkets, the grain receival sites, etc. So don't sell. And when there are aggregators, from a corporate perspective and large NGO perspective, be really look at those aggregators as to who's taking the margin here, who's getting the benefit, financial benefit of aggregating the data. And then finally, with climate, it's been be careful about our aspirations versus the tools that are available. And for a farm level, there are very few mitigation tools currently available. We talk about vaccines, we talk about Asparagopsis. None of those are available right now. You know, the vaccine, they've been working on it for 25 years. It might be available in about 5 years. Asparagopsis, it currently costs $1.26 per head per day to feed that to sheep. Really, it needs to cost 7 cents. Given the price of lamb, you won't be paying the actual price of lamb in the supermarket at the moment, but what the farmer is getting. So they need to be commercially available. And I think when we talk about nature-based actions, we need to be ready with understanding how we're going to actually resource that, because there should be some learnings from climate. And the last one is around capability. You know, there's very little advice available at a farm scale to help people do on-farm assessments and then integrate that through the supply chain. We need to be thinking about that for TNFD at the same time as we're developing the frameworks at a global level.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge. My father is 73 and he's on a farm and he can just use an iPad, so asking him for disclosing his nature positive frameworks and the impacts he's having in his mitigation strategies might be a stretch too far, but hopefully the next generation will be coming up behind. Estelle, I can see you madly scribbling away there.
I mean, I think that, Alex made a really good point about the consistency of information and farmers, companies being asked by a whole lot of different investors or lenders for information in different ways. So that's where that kind of consistency of disclosures comes into it, and hopefully the TNFD will help, the framework will help with that. And I completely concur on what we call the sustainability skills gap. Like, this needs to be, and there are a whole lot of kind of public policy, I suppose, and incentive questions as well in what you said. Like, this needs to be a really integrated approach, looking at workforce planning, looking at training up executives, looking at, where are the skills, what are the skills that we need now and what are we going to need in 5 years' time. And that goes to the economic transition that we need in relation to climate, but also in relation to moving towards this nature-positive economy.
And not surprisingly, the time is escaping us, and we can't go much further, sort of jumping to a different element of this, but any discussion around protecting the environment needs to involve the wisdom of our First People in caring for country. How can organisations better collaborate with traditional owners to find that respectful intersection between Indigenous knowledge and business imperatives? I'm going to throw it out there. Who wants to take it up? I'm looking at you.
I might.
No, Estelle.
I might just note that I'm talking too much. Sorry.
No, you're not. This is the whole point. It's good.
Yeah, but the TNFD framework does have quite a comprehensive guide on engagement with Indigenous people and local communities, as well as stipulate some of the disclosures that it's asking for companies to make in relation to how they're engaging with Indigenous communities, but also using Indigenous knowledge as part of how they measure nature. So there are a whole lot of opportunities there, which is happening at the moment. You know, we ran a workshop a couple of weeks ago on TNFD, where the case study of the Cairns Airport, which is currently being built in Cairns, obviously, using Indigenous knowledge in how they're measuring nature, but also engaging with the local Indigenous rangers up there in terms of kind of protecting the environment. So there's all sorts of examples out there now, and internationally as well, in terms of how Indigenous communities and First Nations groups need to be not just consulted, but actually engaged in that process, which is really important. And also examples of how Indigenous knowledge is now being incorporated into measurement of nature through environmental accounts, which I think is really exciting.
That's great.
I think I might just throw in a comment there that often we engage, and whether it's with our First Nations people or other key stakeholder groups, and it's within a time frame that suits the organisation. You know, there's project plans, and it's often really easy to throw out consultation just before the corporate sector or government takes a break before Christmas, and puts out and says, you know, we've got X number of weeks, or recently there was a consultation here in Victoria from a Commonwealth perspective, and they gave us 24 hours notice to get to Melbourne for a meeting. Now if we're talking about truly reaching our stakeholders, that means dropping tools. For me, a couple of hours up the road to drive to Melbourne to participate at the last minute. So consultation needs to be in a time frame that suits the stakeholders and the groups that we are engaging with, and we often don't take the time to understand what is that cycle for those groups that we're wanting to hear from. And if we're truly going to listen, we need to take the time to do that. And too often we say we've engaged with First Nations, we've engaged with the farm or the local community, and it fits this box of X number of days, and we've put it in this newspaper, we've been out there and done a workshop, and no time, we don't sit back and say, did it suit the farming cycle? Did we actually think about, where people were on country? Did we go to them? Did we make them come to us? Does that limit, in terms of public transport access, people coming in? So I think, we've just got to be thinking common sense about how do we engage and make sure we set up for successful listening.
Yeah, and it may be something that's going to take some time, that's for sure.
Which often we don't have.
No, exactly. Time's running out, but we need to.
And you just had the time card flashed.
Yes.
The time is running out.
Speaking of time, we've got time for probably one or two more questions before we let our dear listeners have a break. Elisa, TNFD sits alongside a range of tools and policies, which you are very au fait with. The Nature Repair Bill, carbon and biodiversity offsets, credits, and so on and so on and so on. There is a lot of concern about, and even when I've been talking to people prior to this breakfast this morning, greenwashing, transparency in reporting. How can the onus be put back on business for genuine action and leadership? Is your answer just going to be mandatory disclosure?
No. I actually wanted to focus on integrity. Because this is an issue that's come up in the carbon space, and I think it absolutely needs to be at the heart and centre of how we're looking at nature and biodiversity conservation as well. And so it overlaps with the concept of using the market to achieve these outcomes, which is essentially directing financial flow into getting these positive outcomes, the nature positive outcome or our net zero outcome. And integrity kind of has two key components to it. It is, are you actually achieving the impact on the ground? Is there actually a change taking place as has been promised? So in a climate context, that's obviously, are you actually reducing emissions, or are you removing those emissions out of the atmosphere? In a nature context is, well, are you getting those biodiversity outcomes? Are you restoring the environment sufficiently, or are you, as emphasised before, protecting the environment that we already have? So it's really important that we get integrity in terms of the output, but the other really emerging issue is the integrity of the use of credits. And obviously this is, there's a lot of concern about this in the climate context in terms of the kind of the greenwashing aspect. So is it appropriate for companies to be able to continue to operate as business as usual by offsetting their way forward? No, clearly that's not going to get us to the climate goals that we've got. And I think that has to be viewed in the same way in the nature context as well. And it's even more important in the nature context because with climate, the greenhouse gas emissions, they're fungible essentially, but with nature it's not. The natural environment, particularly our historical natural environment, it's not like you can go and reproduce that somewhere else. And that really emphasises the importance, I guess, of conserving that natural environment. So I think there is a big issue for me about, again, using that market lens to get these outcomes. We have to do it in a really careful way in terms of creating biodiversity credits and using these credits, that it's not just seen as an excuse or a justification to go and then destroy nature elsewhere. So I think that's probably my reflection on that question.
And Alex, coming back to you again, I don't think I actually asked you this question when you were touching on how difficult things are, but is there anyone, you're obviously in touch with a lot of different organisations in your role and at the small level and the high level, is there leadership in the agriculture space? Can you give us any examples, or is there anyone who's really moving forward in the team?
Look, there definitely are leaders at a whole range of different scales that are doing pretty remarkable things, and it's driven by an intrinsic value system more than a financial reward or some other driver. And you see that both at a farm scale and a company level as well, because I don't know that the market instruments are really there just yet to truly give the reward for some of the actions that are, could be taken. And I've seen, farms, many of you will have heard of Jigsaw Farms near Hamilton, and there'll be a number of people in the room that have been there and heard Mark Wootton speak and others. And there are others like Fiona Conroy on the Bellarine Peninsula, Gillian Heyman in Gippsland with their farm businesses, and what they are doing to achieve either net zero or a nature positive approach at a farm scale. And truly, they get quite frustrated with some of the corporates they engage with some of the government policy. But it's also those leading people sometimes can actually ride a wave and then have a bit of a crash. And Jigsaw Farms recently, because of the change because they were such early adopters to being climate net zero, as their tree lots reached maturity, that carbon sink on their property reduced because the trees aged. And so some of those learnings from our leading players, either in corporate business, in the not-for-profit or at a farm scale, we need to be looking at that and going, right, great that they were net zero, but now that they're not, because of the system that, from a policy perspective, we were all encouraging them to adopt, they're now no longer. What are the solutions next to help them maintain over the long term that sustainability? So there definitely are leaders at every scale, but often they're not the ones that, raising the flag that you might read about in various papers and literature. They're just quietly getting on and doing it, and I think it's up to us around the room to tell stories about them. And really, think about, we were talking about First Nations earlier, tell stories about what is working. So there's some really beautiful stories out there. We just need to replicate those.
Right. Well, thank you for that, Alex. We've got plenty of food for thought at the moment. I don't know if there's any food left on the tables, but we will give you a short networking break now, or toilet break, so to speak, and then we'd like to open up the opportunity for you to ask questions to our panel. So we'll give them a breather, and you can come back with your questions. Don't make them too hard, and please be friendly. But we'll let you have a break, and we'll be back in about 9:35 or so. But thank you. Can we please thank our panel for all their hard work for the past 50 minutes, I think, nearly. Thanks again. We'll be back shortly. Now, as a journalist, I love asking questions and hogging the stage, but I really need to open it up to everyone else here today. So please jump in if you do have a question for either one or all of our panellists today. Is anyone hoping to kick off the line of questioning? Excellent. So just wait, the mic's coming your way, and if you don't mind saying who you are, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Louise Arkles, and I work for the Ian Potter Foundation, which is a philanthropic foundation based here in Melbourne, funding nationally. My question to the panel, hello Alex, particularly you, is around community, because as a philanthropic foundation, we make grants to charitable organisations, and they can be from Friends of the Merry Creek, whoever, might be organisations like Bush Heritage, who we do support, universities, etc. What I hear when we have open round applications for grants that we make is that there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm and commitment in the community, but they're so severely stretched. And I have a concern that if governments and corporates come in thinking the nature repair market and other tools like this are going to solve the problem, what might happen is that community groups that have traditionally been the backbone, and this includes farmers and landowners and people who have this genuine passion and deep experience and knowledge of the land, that they might be then pushed aside, defunded in a way, and lose a lot of power and agency as these other mechanisms come in over the top. So I'm interested in how we might ensure communities are at the forefront of the changes.
I hadn't thought of that. That's a great question. Yeah. Thank you very much. Alex, you want to
thanks.
That?
Hello, Louise. Fantastic. I'm not sure if my mic's on.
It's on its way.
Okay.
I can see AV. Yep, all good.
It's a fantastic question, and what? No, is that on?
I think you're not quite on yet. Testing. Neither am I.
There we go.
Am I on?
No.
Yes. No, I think you are now. Oh, great. Okay, I'm on today. Great question, because community, we are all part of community, and agency, and we talk a lot about community engagement. It's in lots of policy, and companies talk about community empowerment, community engagement. But in reality, it's you swoop in, fly in, do some work, and fly back out. I think it comes down to the sort of two pieces. We can only progress at the speed of trust, and trust takes time to develop. So when we talk about, where do we start? We'll just start now with something, because it will take some time to get that trust with community, and particularly community partnerships, if we're trying to get that cultural change. And the other piece is around how do we listen, and how do we ensure that there is a community voice and First Nations voice, key stakeholder voices, that are contributing to our decision making. And I think if every time we're talking about a decision that your committee, your company, your organisation, your community is making, it's have we got the right voices that have contributed to this decision? Have we heard from the right range of people? So I think that's a question each of us can take away into how we operate to ensure that there is that opportunity to hear, and that we actually consciously and deliberately pause and think about what has been heard. Because with the urgency, and we talked earlier in the break around urgency, there's this urgency that if we're going to have certain things in place by 2030, and if mandatory reporting comes in place, then it's actually only 7 years, which is, if you think about it, that's only a couple of election cycles. A lot more ministers in between, at least in Victorian ag. And from a farmer perspective, it's only 7 harvests, of which you can expect 50% of those to not make any money, which will change your whole outlook on investing to drive change. So it's not, we really need to have things happen. And so balancing the urgency of getting on and doing stuff with taking the time to truly engage and listen is something that we have to each individually and collectively think about how we do that, so that we do it meaningfully.
Estelle, do you think, though, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, but Louise, the chance that these sort of more community-based organisations could be sidelined or taken over by your consulting firms, or they're getting the dollars to do this work, and then, as a consequence of that, the steam is taken out of the energy, the communal spirit. Is there a risk of that, do you think?
Look, I think what's happening now is that we're seeing more of a focus on, they talk about Indigenous people and local communities. So it's not just the First Nations people that really need to be engaged properly and involved in decision making. And also sort of talking about access and benefit sharing and so on. So I think that's really encouraging language or perspective that's kind of coming out of this conversation globally, which is really important. And I think, Alex made the point early on that I think is really important. You need to engage on their terms, and that's something that, it's taken a while, I think, for the business community to really understand what that means. You can't just throw a document and say, oh, here you go, could you please provide us with some comments on this over the next 2 days? But you actually need to go speak the language, understand sort of the perspectives, and do kind of a proper process where there is a two-way communication and exchange. So so I think that kind of the focus on local communities is really very important. And, there's this is something that we all, as I said before, every sector in our society needs to be engaged in. And I think, you know, groups like Friends of the Merry Creek, which I know really well, so thank you from the bottom of my heart. I go for my runs down there and the change has been incredible. Like the birds are coming back and it's just beautiful. And this is, something that everybody needs to do. So, completely understand and concur, and I think there is a consciousness and awareness of that.
Thank you for your question, Louise. We've got one down here and then this table here, I think, next. Thank you.
Good morning all, and thank you for the panel discussion. My name is Desiree. I work for You Ethical Investors. This morning I shared a great quote to the team, with the team. Good fortune favours the brave and chance the prepared minds. So the question I have is for Mrs. Gartmann.
Mm-hmm.
So are we having the brave conversation in Australia about shifting away from cotton and rice, which would have massive impacts to nature and biodiversity? You mentioned that there are not some commercial solutions, and I understand the challenges for those commercial crops, but if you're not brave enough to really take stock of that in the driest continent on Earth, what kind of biodiversity objectives can we meaningfully achieve in the country?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because we, as a society, I think there's a broader conversation, because if we think, well, the individual rice and cotton farmer needs to make a decision to move away from that commodity to something that they may feel completely ill-equipped to implement on farm, or have their bank backing them to transition away from something that proven capability, markets and returns into a different commodity, that's a big capital and financial investment, and someone bearing the big risk of that. So I think the decision by individual producers and land managers to make change needs to be supported by the policy, regulatory and financial markets to do that. And so a lot of what the FD, sorry, let's try to take the N and the C out of it, is directed at those financial markets to influence then where the capital goes, because where that goes, it really does influence the behaviour of those that access that capital. So I think it's a great question. I don't think the agricultural industry has had explicit, open, really brave and bold conversations. But I don't think it should be just the agricultural industry having that, because there are mechanisms in place at a state and federal level around trade and key policy positions that influence, inform and encourage investment and activity in certain areas. So this is something that, yes, we need to engage those individual agricultural producers in, but that bold conversation has to be system-wide, and really thinking about those that transition, change and support. And if we use an example from WA at the moment with the conversations and engagement around phasing out live sheep exports, there's some learnings there around how not to approach saying it'll happen on this date and now we'll work backwards. So I think there are the bold conversations, but I don't think we have all the right people in the room to have those just yet.
Told you there'd be no hard questions, Alex. Thank you very much. And over here, thank you.
Hi, my name's Elisa. I work for the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action. I have an interest in soil organic carbon, and in terms of the TNFD, what's being done to curb the decline in soil organic carbon in the broadacre farming sector, knowing that this is something that's been historically invisible in the corporate boardroom and generally misunderstood by farmers on ground.
They're all for you. No, we had just said we need to be talking about soil carbon, so I'm going to invite you to speak first.
So I come at it from a carbon perspective, because we work with those out there who are doing soil carbon projects on ground. I think what I would say, the observation I'd make is we're still quite early days in terms of seeing whether we're going to get the results that are expected. So, and there is obviously a lead time. There's the 5-year lead time to be able to get the credits from this improvement in the soil carbon. I have heard lots of mixed views on soil carbon, which is why I wanted to catch up with Alex on this, because there are some who don't think it's appropriate at all in terms of using it to generate carbon credits, which can then be sold and used and offset, and then what happens if the carbon in the soil is lost. But there are some who feel really passionate about it and do think that there needs to be lots more investment and opportunities to really improve the soil, the carbon in the soil, and that using, as I said, markets is a mechanism to do that. So I'm, I guess, still on the fence, even though, you know, I work with those who are out there doing the projects. I'm still on the fence as to how much of a contribution this will make to addressing the climate problem. Of course, you know, then talking about the nature issue as well.
Yeah. So I'll add into that. Soil organic carbon is recognised as it's absolutely fundamental for agricultural production and ecosystem health. And there's, as a land care coordinator back when I first started out of university, working with farmers on soil health, soil organic carbon, and they understand it, they recognise that they're doing annual soil testing and tracking that over time and see the ups and the downs. There are real challenges with that as a sort of silver bullet for agriculture and carbon capture and storage. And I think there's not a one-size-fits-all across Australia. Soil carbon, and there is a maximum amount of soil carbon based on your soil type, your agro-eco-zone, your rainfall. And through drought years, there is going to be a negative impact on soil carbon, no matter what farm management practice you have over the top. There will be a decline. It'll vary. And the same with soil carbon, you know, soil sampling. You know, if you've had a cow herd that's happened to, you know, hang there and defecate, there will be a very different measurement. And so, how do you get that measurement across our extensive pasture systems in Australia? And so, for me, thinking about soil carbon, it's knowing that yes, it's a great place and it's fundamental to drive more efficient, productive, climate-smart agriculture, but there's a finite amount we can expect to capture in soil carbon. And really, in a higher rainfall zone, it's much more reliable. In low rainfall zones, it's almost impossible to build that up and to really monitor and measure it and be able to then have it engaged in a market. So I think there's some science and technology advancements needed before we've really been able to truly recognise and reward performance in that space.
Thanks, Alex. Great question. We've only got time for one more. That's how quick. 50. Oh, 2 more. Okay, we've got 2 more. All right. Okay, I've been overruled. Thank you.
This is bringing it back to the community, because if we are wanting to get change, landscape scale change, and thinking about the fact that corporations are driven by, in the end, the consumers of their products, and governments are driven by the election cycle. Basically, a need we have is for the community to actually feel recognise the intrinsic worth of our biodiversity. So it is important for the community to be able to connect with that. And one useful way for corporations that could happen is by citizen science data being more greatly accepted. I think there is a movement towards that, with iNaturalist in particular, that is actually gaining a lot of traction as a database for baseline data. And I was just wondering whether there is, you know, that iNaturalist, for example, has made it up to people like of the panels, in the panels area of operations. Thanks.
Estelle, you haven't had a go in a while, or is it?
I'd just say that at this point in time, whatever data is being used and fed into things like nature-related financial disclosures or climate disclosures needs to have integrity. So that is, you know, our members corporations increasingly and regulators are increasingly focused on greenwashing, and nobody wants to get done for greenwashing. We have some concerns in some areas that directors of companies are going to be somehow liable if a data point is wrong or whatever that is. That's the way to kind of deal with that is to disclose where your data's from. And the backing of that data and making sure that that can be sort of, all those claims can be backed up. And so whatever data that is being used needs to have integrity. In terms of the citizen science data, I guess that would depend on the kind of data that is being used, how it's being measured, whether it's auditable, and how kind of transparent, I suppose, it is. So yeah, that's kind of, I guess, the comment that I would make on that.
There's certainly some sophistication and maturing required for that to be used in company reporting. But there are some examples, like there's the Museum of Australia has a fantastic frogs, community citizen frogs database. And so when it's been built up and the framework has been verified, then I think there's confidence that the data going in is robust. And there's also a quantum that means that even if there are some small errors in some of the data collection, that data set in its entirety is actually got integrity. So some of those frameworks, I think, can be used for different types of data collection, but they're certainly not all out there.
So we're nearly at the end of our time. We'll get one more quick question, if that's okay.
Thank you. Priya Pathmanathan, CPB Contractors. Just wanted to ask, mainly Elisa actually, just in terms of the understanding or the comment about net zero. So when majority of Australians don't understand that net zero, you need to draw down, not just get to net zero, and then most governments, all level, have no scope 3 targets. Do you think like we're actually, there's a lot of learning in both. I think it seems to me that we have to still keep learning in the carbon space as well as then bring along the nature space.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And with no disrespect to the corporate community, I mean, a lot of them have just gone and set their net zero targets without actually appreciating or having any idea of how they're going to get to that. And you're absolutely right. And it's net, which means it's reduce your emissions as to the full extent you can, and then there will be an element that has to be offset. So we absolutely need still that the carbon sequestration, the storage, and we are going to need, and there's been a lot of investment put into this, we're going to need to suck the carbon out of the atmosphere. That's what it's going to come down to. So a huge amount of investment going into removal technologies. But I do think there needs to be more focus, and there will be, because the regulators are stepping up to this, to go, well, actually, what is your transition plan? How are you going to get from here to here? And what are you going to do about your scope 3 emissions? Because that is obviously the hardest bucket to tackle. But with the mandatory climate disclosure reporting, that will start to kick in and put more emphasis on scope 3. And so that, we were talking earlier about, well, should it be voluntary or mandatory? I think it should be mandatory, because actually you do want all of this data being captured. But it's that old adage that you can't manage what you don't measure. So if we start measuring it and we have this full understanding, then we can start to think about how we can manage it. And if we are going to get the investment flowing to where it needs to be, then that will give us a framework to facilitate that.
And I might just add as well, we have seen some stepping back from some of the net zero claims that they've been making because of this focus on greenwashing. So there is this real need to substantiate the claims that you're making, have a plan, what's the trajectory, what's the capex expenditure, and a caution, I think, at the moment to not rely too much on offsets to get there, or on, technology that hasn't been invented yet or hasn't been proven to scale yet or whatever. So that's, I think something that particularly our members are focused on.
And if I can just bring, sorry, Emily, I'll just bring it back then to thinking about it from a farm scale, and often scope 3 is really hard there. But as companies are trying to sort of work out what's my footprint and what's my scope 3 from the full, supply to end consumer, think about it, if you've got a sheep and it's producing meat and wool, and then there's an ecosystem component in terms of pasture and grazing, how do you chop that sheep up from its emissions and say, well, this amount goes to the wool value chain, this amount goes to the meat value chain, and this amount goes to sort of the pasture use and you know, the shearing contractors, etc. So there are, I think there's complexities when we start to try and take it right down to where those emissions come from, and the issue of attribution and who measures what scope 3. Who gets that number and what proportion of particularly one animal or one system.
Well, that was a doozy, and thank you very much for answering it so well. We have an absolute bank of knowledge here, which I wish we could invest in these three and get some offsets for our business. But can we please give our panel a huge round of applause?